For those of us that like to make things with our hands, adding those extra little details is what makes the project more worthwhile to us. This video is about adding raised and lined details to wet molded vegetable tan leather coin purses with pull tab and keeper flap closure designs. Repurposing the work I have already done, using the same molds and patterns and simply adding variations to them is a way to save time, but also the building technique itself expands the art of decorative embellishments. Since I have made wet molded coin purses before with the same dimensions, etc., adding a pull tab to the flap and keeper assembly is easier. These coin purses are basically the same with refinements to the moving parts or the parts that the user of the coin purse will touch and manipulate, so the changes I make to the existing parts must be accurately sized to fit. Starting with detailed drawings in 1:1 scale, I use my Glowforge laser printer to make negative and positive MDF wet molds. The bottom lining mold is offset a 1/16 of an inch because the 3 to 4 ounce vegetable tan leather I am molding is a 1/16 of an inch. The assumption is that the shrink rate when drying will be about the same, so the molds you make will depend on the choice of leather you use. Then when the leather is bone dry, I make acrylic cutout templates to accurately guide my hobby knife to make accurate cuts. I also find it useful to rough cut some of the larger stretched pieces and trim them after they have been glued together and products have been applied. That will swell as the leather absorbs them, changing the leather shape too. The remaining case parts, including the interior lining, are cut from 2 to 3 ounce vegetable tan leather. Accurately cutting the parts out is important if you want the curved parts to line up, especially when cutting leather split thin, so the acrylic templates are sturdy enough to cut around to ensure accuracy of complicated shapes. If the lining and surface leather are not accurately cut, sandwiching a piece of leather between them to create a raised and lined effect will be more difficult, if even possible, to match up. The acrylic template designs are offset a 1/16 of an inch to stretch the surface leather around the raised leather shapes because I used the scraps from a side of 3 to 4 ounce leather. That is about a 1/16 of an inch. High quality vegetable tan leather is expensive, so finding ways to use the parts of the hide that are trimmed from larger pieces makes economic sense as well. Raw natural leather has a nice look to it, but if you want to add color, an airbrush is an excellent way to apply dye to leather evenly. I use a Fiebing's product called EcoFlow and wear a mask and rubber gloves as a safety precaution. Then I let the leather dry completely, which is usually a few hours. Another way to do it is to spray a larger piece and cut the parts out from it, but I like to use different colors, so committing to one color limits my options. Also, I sometimes like to cut extra pieces just in case I make a mistake and need to start over. After the surface of the leather is colored, the edges of the parts are skived to remove excess bulk and create a sunken seam. You can skive the parts before you add dye, but the dye will absorb along the edges faster. Since the leather is very thin, care is needed not to cut into the natural edge. Having a nice hard flat surface like this marble and a sharp knife makes the skiving easier. When creating raised and lined parts, the acrylic templates make good glue-up jigs because they help keep the parts lined up, which makes the parts easier to control before the glue starts to dry. As most of us that have used eco-friendly glue before, it does not respond the same way as traditional leathercraft cement. I worry more about toxic fumes coming from industrial products as I get older because illness from industrial products off-gassing toxic chemicals without proper ventilation is avoidable. Tools I find helpful when I am gluing are a small sponge applicator used for cleaning electronic equipment, a glue eraser, and even though I took the time to make an acrylic jig to shape the raised and lined areas, small modeling tools with smooth rounded shapes help to ensure the leather is stretched tightly around the raised leather to create sharp pronounced edges and curves without tearing the leather. I like to finish the edges before attaching the pull tab to the flap because it is easier to stitch and finish flat. Since the raised area makes it difficult to sink the thread into the seam with a gentle tap of a hammer on a flat surface, A set of flat pliers works well to flatten the seam to avoid the thread snagging on something when in use. This set is from Amy Roque. After attaching the pull tab, I built the keeper to fit around it. For the keeper, the raised element helps provide strength as well as decoration. First, scribe a line 1/8 of an inch from the edge and punch the stitch marks when the keeper is flat. I am using Crimson Hide 5mm chisels, measuring where the holes will end up after the keeper is glued into place around a curve. Start with a flat area, then bend the sides around it. Then when dry, the holes can be punched through, stitched, and the edges finished before attaching the ends during final assembly. An alternative to the flat pull tab that uses the same flap and keeper shape is a loop pull tab. To draw the pull tab pattern, I used the mirror function in AutoCAD, so it took me less than 5 minutes to draw the new pull tab part and print the acrylic pattern for it, then cut out the parts. After the pull tab parts are dyed, I like to gently stretch the strap around a 2-inch dowel. The top strap is stretched to fit on top of the liner after it is glued in place and stitched around a curve. A raised element on the top of the pull tab is glued and clamped, then glued and stitched onto the flap. The loop creates 6 layers of leather to stitch together on the end. A slight variation to the wide pull tab and keeper that wraps around the side is a narrow pull tab flap with a keeper on top of the pocket. Since this style of leather case is assembled in stages, each part needs to be finished accurately, so I like to burnish and edge paint the parts that'll be difficult to get at after assembly before attaching them. Small electrical clips are perfect tools for adding raised and line details to even the smallest parts. Another variation of a narrow pull tab flap and keeper is a raised and lined loop pull tab. The raised part of the back of the loop is a wear leather reinforcement that needs to be glued around a curve, and a small dowel works great for this. After the pull tab is shaped, the sides are stitched and finished before attaching the pull tab to the flap. To create a continuous seam on the pull tab after stitching the sides and gluing the loop permanently, the end of the thread is started and then trapped by gluing in place. Then the holes can be punched through with an awl and saddle stitch to finish the seam.